Hello, welcome to Far More Colorado. My name is Barbara Paris. I'm a Colorado native and a jazz singer, and I'm interviewing Mr. Billy Wallace today, who is an actual jazz treasure that we have living in Colorado at this time. Billy has been playing the piano professionally since 1947, and he is still with us today in 2014 playing the piano. So we're just going to ask him some questions about how he got started playing the piano and how this evolved. He evolved into being this wonderful musician that he is. So you were born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yes.
And you went to school there.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a piano in your home, you mentioned.
Yeah.
So you were not taking lessons or studying at school piano, you were just studying regular courses?
Oh, I took a few lessons, but it didn't last.
It didn't. And so how did you come about playing the piano?
I started playing boogie woogie, and I had a friend who lived about 2 doors away from me who also played, and we used to sort of compete and kind of go to each other's house and play. And I was at a place called the Urban League, and another friend of mine, I can't say he was a friend, but I knew him. He came by and showed me a way to play boogie woogie on the piano. His name was Jack, but I can't remember his last name.
Was he much older than you?
Probably maybe 5, 6 years.
And how old were you at the time?
I was a teenager, about 16, 17.
And so he showed you some way to play boogie woogie, and then and you two used to just, your neighbor boy also learned. Did he learn from Jack as well?
No. He could read quite well, and he could play piano. And we used to sort of compete. We'd work out stuff and sneak at each other's houses or listen to what one was doing.
So learn from each other?
Yeah, sort of.
So you finished high school, and you were studying in high school. You took some lessons, didn't you, in high school?
I took harmony, lessons in harmony. One of my high school teachers, my music teacher, Thomas Oakes, he taught me harmony and composition.
And so when you finished high school, were you playing professionally, or how did you happen to start playing?
I joined, every spring they'd have, at high school, they'd have what they called a variety show, and it had bands and different people. And I was on the show one time because the gymnastics, I used to do gymnastics, and I was on the gymnastic team, and we went and did a show, and I was back in the wing standing, waiting, and one of the bands started playing a song by I can't think of his name now, but he was a very popular trumpet player, and he called it Backbeat Boogie, and they were playing that, and I started playing it with them in the background where the piano was. And the teacher that sponsored it heard me. So the next year they had the show, he wanted me to play there. And I played, and there was a band there called Bobby Ray. And they heard me, and they used to play on Saturday and Monday and Tuesday nights. And they didn't know much about boogie woogie. All they knew how to do was read. And this kind of fascinated them, so they got me to play with them this boogie woogie, and I learned to read and play the songs that they played, and I became interested in it, and that's kind of how I got started.
So where did they play those evenings? Was it a...
They used to play at social centers for kids to dance. And another thing, I got to stay out late because I was never allowed to stay out after dark by myself. So...
But your parents approved of your playing the piano out?
Well, it didn't bother them. I don't know if they approved, but it didn't bother them.
So did you play that last year of high school with that band? Is that what you were doing? Was it during high school?
Yeah, I was during high school. The last 2 years I was in high school, I played with them.
Mm-hmm. And so you by working with them, you got your reading skills more developed, and they learned boogie woogie from you, and so
you play boogie woogie on the piano. They couldn't play boogie woogie. That was the reason they were kind of fascinated with me, because they didn't know how to play without reading.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how to play jazz.
Well, to this day, you still play without reading. You can read music, but you know 5,000 tunes about, and you know them pretty much in every key by heart, don't you? That's been a lifetime of learning.
Well, that's just knowing music.
Mm-hmm. So when you did finish high school and that band, did you continue working with that band, or you continued taking lessons?
For a while I did, and then I kind of faded out. I had a teacher at school. His name was Thomas Oakes. He was the music and band director. And he taught me harmony. And when I graduated, I took private lessons from him for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you happen to leave Milwaukee? Were you still interested in playing professionally after you finished with the band from high school?
I hadn't really thought about it. I just did it.
So how did you happen to? Did you just start working in Milwaukee, or did you?
Yeah, I started playing with different bands there. And people who knew I could played piano, they would hire me to play for dances. That was mostly what you played for, was dances.
That was pretty much the culture of music at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody was dancing.
Yes.
And so you played around Milwaukee at the time.
Yes, I sure did. And
What got
a
you?
very famous saxophonist, Illinois Jacquet, came through town. And he was staying at a lady's house who played piano and sang, and I knew her. And I used to go by her house, and I went by there and started playing the piano. And Illinois heard me, and he invited me to come out to the club where he was working and sit in. And I went and played with him there. And he asked me to go on the road with him, so I started traveling with him.
And did you tell your parents you were going to go traveling with him?
Well, I guess I did.
How old were you at the time?
19. 18, 19.
And so where did you leave? Where did you go when you left Milwaukee with Illinois Jacquet? Was it a big band, or was it a quartet, or?
It was a septet.
Oh, septet.
And he grew up with one of the saxophone players in the band, whose name was Tom Archer, and they were from Houston, Texas. Mm-hmm. And Illinois Jacquet was from Houston, Texas. So Tom Archer was living in Chicago, and he was in the band, and Ernie Henry, who was playing alto. He had been with Dizzy Gillespie's big band. And for a short while they had trombone player, I can't think of his name now. Benny Green, I think that's his name. And after that,
Did you go to Chicago from Milwaukee to play with them?
no, they left. I think the first job we played was in Toledo, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And we went all different places. And we went south. We played in North Carolina. I can't remember the name of the town, but it was in a tobacco warehouse where we played.
All dancing? Lots of dancers?
Well, I don't know what was going on. This was all new experience for me, so I had no idea what was going on. But that was my first trip south. And then I think we went to Waycross, Georgia. And we played different places, and when we got back to New York, I decided I'd had enough of this, and I went back to Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
And I was married at the time, so
You got married when you went back to Milwaukee?
yes. No, I do it. I went back to Milwaukee and I started working at a nightclub there. And I was too young. The police said to be in there. I was 20 and you had to be 21. And there was another piano player who was older who kept sending the police in there. So I lost that job, but the bass player was from Des Moines, Iowa. And he went back to Des Moines, and then he called me to come play in Des Moines in 1949, around June. And I went there and stayed till about November and played with a band at the Watkins Hotel. We were the house band. And then I came back, and that next summer I got married, and seems like maybe the next year Illinois Jacquet came through town, and there was a lady that played piano and sang, and I used to go to her house, and she provided lodging for the band members, and Illinois Jacquet was there, and I was at her house and I was playing piano, and he heard me, and he invited me to come out and sit in with him at the club he was working at. So I did that, and he offered me a job to go on the road, so I did.
But when you went on the road with him, were you married at when you went on the road with Illinois Jacquet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you were already married at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any children at that point? You were 20 or 19.
I might have had my oldest daughter at that time.
So when you went back to Milwaukee, and you left with that other musician that invited you to go away and play for those, was it, where did you leave the second time you left Milwaukee to go play?
The second time I left, I was with Max Roach.
Okay, and how did you happen to meet Max Roach?
At a place, he played in I can't think of the name of the jazz club.
Was it in Milwaukee?
It was in Chicago.
Oh, it was in Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, I moved when I came back with Illinois Jacquet. I didn't want to stay in Milwaukee anymore. So I moved to Chicago 1951.
And so were you working in Chicago during that period of time?
When I first started, I worked in strip clubs because that was the only thing I could work in. And that was in Calumet City, so it was sort of out of the jurisdiction of the Chicago Musicians Union.
Oh, why could you only do that? Because you weren't old enough?
No, because when you come to a town, you have to stay there a certain amount of time before you can work steady.
Oh, I see. So that's how you survived, was working those other jobs?
Working in Calumet City, yes.
Mm-hmm. And then did you stay in Chicago from 1951 until?
1964.
So you had a nice long stay there. And were you a house band? After you finished your preliminary time there and you could work full time, where did you work after that? Did you get a house band that you worked in? Or?
No, I just worked when people would call me.
And they all got to know you from just different sessions and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
jam sessions and things like that?
Exactly, exactly.
So you go sit in and then people get to know you and then
Yeah.
they started calling you and pretty soon you were working full time, huh?
Yeah.
Did you like Chicago?
At the time I did.
And who did you work with in Chicago?
Freeman, who was one of the best saxophone players around, and
Is that where you met Max Roach?
yes.
Okay, did you go on the road during that period of time from 51 to 62 with Max Roach and then come back to Chicago?
No, I went with Max Roach around 1955.
Mm-hmm.
And Clifford Brown had been killed the previous spring, so he was not with the band. He had Kenny Durham, who used to play with Charlie Parker, was the trumpet player.
Mm-hmm.
And the others were Max, and George Morrow was the bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about it. It was a 5-piece band.
And where did you go tour?
The first place we went was California, Los Angeles. We played at a place called Jazz City in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. You recorded one of Max Roach's most popular records at the time. It was 3/4 Time. Where did you do that recording?
And Capitol Records in Los Angeles.
Was that your first tour to the West Coast that you did with him?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who was on that recording?
Sonny Rollins and Kenny Durham and George Morrow, Max Roach, and myself.
So did you record that in one day, or was it several different
Yeah,
songs?
we recorded because we'd been playing the song on the road. We played all the clubs because they had made the record.
Oh, they had.
Yeah, and so they recorded, and they recorded it again with me playing, and after California, I'm trying to think, I don't know where we went. We were in Los Angeles about a month. And then then they went to New York, and I went back to Chicago, and Max sent for me in New York, and so I started playing with him there.
And when you were a little bit more time that you were in Chicago, did you have a house band somewhere that you worked with, so where different players came in, and where you met Max Roach and you knew Clifford Brown?
Well, I have a very good friend who is probably the best bass player I've ever played with. His name is Bill Lee. He's Spike Lee's father. And he and I used to go everywhere and play.
Was he living in Chicago at the time?
He was living in Chicago at the time, yes.
He wasn't from Chicago, though. He was from New York, right?
No, he was from Snow Hill, Alabama, and he'd gone to school in It's in Atlanta. He went to Morehouse College in Atlanta. And we played, and there was a place there called, I can't think of the name of the club now, but it was a jazz club, and they hired people. And they had Charlie Parker there. I jammed there with him the week before he died.
And how was that experience? Had you ever met a sax player like him before? Or?
No, but I was probably a little too egotistical because I felt, you know, I was there with him. What he knew, I knew, which probably isn't true, but that was the attitude I had when I played with him, so.
Well, you never know. So you worked at that house band. Who had other players came through there? You played with Clifford Brown. He was a friend of yours. Now, did you meet him in Chicago, or how did you meet him?
Met him in Chicago.
You did?
Yeah.
Did these musicians come through the club, or just meet them in jam sessions and
I met him
various
in jam
places?
sessions, and then Clifford and I got to know each other because he could play piano too. And so we got to know each other, and I used to play saxophone, so he'd play piano and I'd play saxophone at my house, and we got to know each other quite well and became very good friends. And every Monday morning, starting about 7 or 8 o'clock, there was a club on the south side of Chicago that I used to play with Freeman. And Bill Lee played bass, and we had a different assortment of drummers. And in Chicago, Sunday night was a big night. It was like probably Saturday night here. That's when people would go out. And on Monday morning, they had clubs that would be open they would open at 5 o'clock. And
In the morning?
Yeah, and people would pour in there. Because nobody went to bed. Everybody
They were overnight
stayed
clubs.
up all night.
So they had jazz in the morning.
Yeah. And
That must have been fun. Musically, it sounds like a lot of fun.
yeah. And so I was playing at a club, the club where Ahmed Jamal was working. And I can't think of the name of it now, but Clifford Brown came and sat in with us. I was playing with a very fine saxophone named Freeman. And he's one of the best saxophone players I've ever worked with. And and Clifford Brown came and I told him about it, and he came and sat and played with us. So we all got to know each other quite well.
So every time he came to town, he'd come visit and stay.
Well, he was killed shortly after that.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In a car accident. The piano player's wife was driving. They were coming from the East Coast, and they were going to play in Chicago. And Bill Lee, Spike Lee's father, was the best bass player I probably ever played with. And he and I were expecting to hear and see Clifford because we were all good friends.
That's very sad.
Yeah, it was very shocking to us.
Clifford Brown, fabulous trumpet player, left a beautiful collection
He
of
was a
music.
very good piano player, too.
I don't know, were there any records of him playing piano? Do you think he ever
He
did?
had some, but I think they were all tapes of him himself.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a very fine musician.
So at that point then, you got invited by Max Roach again to go back to New York, or?
No, about a year later.
Mm-hmm. So you continued playing in Chicago, and
Yeah.
That was a very rich musical environment there.
Yeah.
Lots of jazz and
Yeah.
not just dancing music, but actual bebop, right?
Yeah.
Bebop. Because you're actually a bebop piano player, and you came right up in that era of music.
Yeah.
It was just what was happening when you were in Chicago, right? The bebop movement was,
When I was growing up, yes.
yeah. So you had boogie woogie, and then you had that Chicago experience of that, and then added the bebop on top of it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Billy.
Thank you.
It's nice to know this interesting history about jazz. I've heard of all the players that you're talking about, and it's nice to know someone that actually knew them during the time that they were coming up in this music, and this music that we cherish, and it's our heritage. So thank you for joining us today on Far More Colorado.